and geology. Prior to turning to writing full-time, she worked as a field geologist and taught geology, paleontology, and oceanography. Susan writes the Frankie McFarland Geologist Mysteries. The series features a field geologist, college professor, and geo-sleuth who lives and works in the West. Each novel is set in a unique geographic and geologic location and includes archaeological, historical, and prehistorical elements. Susan's nonfiction works include A Sweet Separate Intimacy, Women Writers of the American Frontier, 1800 through 1922. Her poems, short stories, and essays have appeared in numerous journals and anthologies. Deciphering the Desert, a book of poems, was a finalist for the Red Mountain Press 2020 Discovery Award. And a poetry chapbook, Making Silent Stones, another geological title, will be released by Finishing Line Press later this year. During this pandemic, in addition to writing poetry, Susan is working on her 7th Frankie McFarland mystery, set in southwestern Arizona and the northern Sonoran, Mexico. And on an impulsive personal note, because I see my sister is logged on with us today, and we are both daughters of a geologist, I'll say a geologist who practiced in southern Arizona. I'll say that I read one of her books. I will be reading more. It covered anything from the Chiricahua Mountains to Puerto Penasco, very important places to my father, to the Eclectic Cafe, which was also important. So I will be sending it to you, sister. Take it from there, Susan.
Okay, so this is the first Zoom talk I have given. So I'm gonna launch it. Okay, and I'm seeing you all on the right of my screen. Hopefully you can all still see me. Okay, well, they'll chat with you and let you know if there's a problem. I chose to present this talk at this time because I knew it would be the dead of winter. And no matter where we live, there are gray days. In some cases, it's 35 below zero, like it is in Alberta. Texas is colder than it's possibly ever been. So I thought, if nothing else, you will see a sun-drenched landscape, and you can imagine yourself there for this 1 hour. But also, the point of the talk is to talk about how a geologist turned crime writer finds the seeds for her stories. Okay, and it didn't like the way I was advancing things, so I'm using a different technique. I also should say it, happy Mardi Gras. This is another happy aspect of today. So as Jody was saying, I write a mystery series, and the protagonist is a geoscientist and works throughout the West, as I did. I want to take readers to places throughout the West and Southwest where I lived and worked or spent a lot of time. And in these books, by design, I was trying to tell the stories through the landscape, which is revealed by the rocks and fossils. And I wanted to tell stories that weave in, as Jody mentioned, elements of ancient cultures and history, ecology, all of the things that I studied. There are 6 books in the series, and I think they're in many of your libraries. All of the titles, as you can see, and as the children of a geologist can see, are geological in origin. they also have at least double meanings. In the case of hoodoo, I think there are 4 meanings. So it's not just double entendre, it's, you know, quatre. The 2 of the most frequently posed questions to me when I'm doing an interview or giving a talk like this is, you know, where do I begin the next book in the series? And how do I find the elements of my stories within that landscape and that history? So that's what I'm sharing with you today. Some of the initial decisions that I made early in the development of this 6-book chasm. So the first 5 books, the initial choice was, where do I set the book? And the first 5 books take you from northeastern Nevada, which is basin and range, to the second book, which Jody mentioned, it's in Puerto Penasco, Mexico, and all the way over to the Chiricahua Mountains and centers in Tucson. The third book takes you out to the middle of the Mojave Desert, where I did my master's thesis work on a quarry, which is, you know, where that book got its name, and to a fictionalized version of my, where I went to school, University of Cal, a fictional campus. They recognize themselves and they have great fun trying to figure out which professors I'm, you know, putting into the story, and I tell them none. Then the 4th book, I went back and spent that time in the Chiricahua Mountains, in the southeast corner of Arizona. And then I went to the Bay Area, which is where I lived and worked for 12 years. I worked for the US Geological Survey there. And then when my division was taken out of the survey, it became the Minerals Management Service. Remember that from the oil spill in the Gulf, and then Bureau of Land Management. I also taught there. I taught geology and oceanography. So I wanted to take readers back to the places I used to take my classes and talk about this extraordinary California geology in the Bay Area with the San Andreas Fault. And that 5th book is called Fracture, and the fracture is that major fault system and plate boundary running through the Bay Area. Oh, I'm sorry. Well, let's see if I can go back. I can go back. Okay, so what you see when you look at those pins on this map is that there's a huge hole in the middle of the map. So when I was looking for where I would set my 6th book, I said, well, okay, what is in there? And that's the Colorado Plateau. And what runs through the Colorado Plateau, but the Colorado River, it has cut down through the plateau to form the Grand Canyon. And so I said, aha, I must take a raft trip down through the canyon, which it's the holy grail for geologists. And it is a place that speaks to us. And this book has been called, the 6th book, Chasm, has been called a love story between a geologist and the rocks of the Grand Canyon, and time, because the rocks there are as old as 1.2 billion years old. So choosing a locale is a complex process. Even if I want to put it in, you know, on the Colorado Plateau, that's a vast area. And that setting has to work on a number of different levels simultaneously. So it gives me the physical landscape, which I described, the topography, gives me the geology and the history and the archaeology, the paleontology, in other words, the fossils there, the ecology, you know, what plants and animals live there today, and the culture. Time which is involved in all of that, is the framework of a four-dimensional story. And I think Mike Hayes, when he gives his talk next month, is going to delve into that quite a bit more. But that fourth dimension of time is very important to my stories, for me to produce what I consider a well-rounded story. The culture plays a little different role here, and that is because it tells me who lives in this place and what they need and what inherent conflicts are present to create tension, because tension, conflict drive the plots. And without a plot, you can't have a murder mystery. So because my protagonist, Frankie McFarlane, is a field geologist and college professor, I've always tried to take the readers to a place that they might not have visited. And I want to show them that place through the eyes of a geologist. When I decided, aha, maybe I can find a raft trip going through the Colorado River, down the Colorado, through the Grand Canyon, guess what happened? Of course, you know, the universe provided, and the Arizona Geological Society decided to have a raft trip. So we had 2 boatloads of geologists going down together on this trip. So there were 28 people and 3 guides on these 2 rafts. And it was a 282-mile journey. There is no way I could have a story that took up that entire length. I knew that going in. So I had to look for what places allowed me to set action scenes down on the river. And then of course, I had to create subplots that could be played out down on the river. And I'm just going to show you some of the sites that I discovered, sites that where I stayed, hiked, dreamed about, and that they begged to be included in this novel and suggested plot threads. This is a map which is in the book, and it shows the dark line, you know, zigzagging through the center is the Colorado River. And there are 2 square areas which then have been enlarged on the map. Those are where most of the scenes will take place, although there are scenes set on the river between those areas. And I'll show you this map again. You don't have to memorize it. You don't have to remember it. I'm just trying to show you roughly what the river looks like, what the course looks like, and how I spaced out the scenes. So one of the 2 initial decisions I had to make are the same that any writer has to make. So Mike needs to do this, Therese needs to do this, Rima needs to, we have a lot of writers on this today. And that is, where do I begin the story and where will I end it? So if I'm not taking you all the way down to 282 miles, then, and which section of this river am I going to use? So the rule for all writers is you start as close to the action as possible. You might have to give some of the earlier information in flashback. And that's what I have done here, or I've disclosed it in dialogue. So you start as close to the action as possible. Now, the action isn't at Lee's Ferry, which is where all of the rafts and boats launch from. mainly because there are very few places to access the river up there. And so I searched, as I went along, I searched for where I could begin the story and what action could happen there. I'm not going to tell you everything that happens because that would be giving away the entire plot. But I will say that the place I chose, and we'll see more of it, is 33 miles downriver. And I chose Nautoid Canyon area because if for any of you that read the first book, Death Assemblage, that book has as a key feature the deaths of Ammonites. And they were at the end of it was the Permian extinction. Nautiloids are a relative of Ammonites. And so I was trying to kind of circle back to that first book and what I had done there, whether you really realized it or not. So we're at Nautoid Canyon, 33 miles downriver, but I wasn't sure, even though that's what I was looking at, if that would have the plot elements or the setting elements necessary for me to start the story there. I also had to decide where to end the story. And as I said, not 282 miles, but 88 miles down the river is Phantom Ranch, which by name alone would be a good place. It has to figure in the story. I chose to end the story there because it is the only place in the canyon where the trails from the north and south rim can cross the river and intersect with the rafts that are going down the river, because everybody stops there. So that was that first where to begin, where to end. I thought I had it. And this columnar section of rock units, also I have this in the book. You don't have to memorize any of that, but I will refer to certain units here. At the base, you have the oldest units, the Vishnu schist and Zoroaster granite, and above them, tilted sedimentary rocks and interbedded volcanics. But above them are the fossiliferous rocks, those in the Paleozoic era. And the third unit, everything on the skyline from the Grand Canyon is at the Kaibab Formation. That's the top. The Coconino Sandstone, I'll show you a slide of that. That's the third unit down. And then I will take you down to the Redwall Limestone. That is Nautoid Canyon is in the Redwall, cuts through the Redwall Limestone, and the river is at that level. So in a sense, my story begins with the Redwall Limestone, which is 340 million years old. To get to the launch place, Lee's Ferry, if you're coming from the south, you take Highway 89, and there's a visitor center there, and you can pull in and walk out on the old bridge and look north and south, or east and west at that point, to the river. But this gives you a feeling of just how stark the landscape is. You've got the north and the south rims here. They are divided by the Colorado River. You cannot climb out unless you are a professional climber. You cannot get out of this canyon. This part of the Grand Canyon National Park is called Marble Canyon. It is not marble. It's limestone and some dolomite and some sandstone, but it's steep walled. And if you're in there on the bottom, there are no trails going along the side. You're either in the water or you're up on the rim. So this is called Navajo Bridge I'm looking down on, and you'll see Navajo Bridge as I go under it in another slide. For your information, so you can envision it, when you launch you're at Lee's Ferry, you're actually surrounded by younger rocks. You're surrounded by rocks deposited during the age of dinosaurs, so Mesozoic era rocks. And that's what you're seeing in the slides on the left. And there, as I said, there were 2 rafts and 3 guides, and we were just divvied up between the 2 rafts. And then we began chugging down the river, floating, sometimes chugging. And this is Navajo Bridge from the river as we were approaching it. Navajo Bridge is 4 miles downstream from Lee's Ferry. When I was standing, both when I was standing up on Navajo Bridge, on the old bridge, and when I went by underneath, I looked at that and I said, well, what would happen if somebody went off Navajo Bridge? And it turns out that there are bodies that they don't survive. And they're carried along the bottom of the river for it can be many, many, many miles. And I thought there's got to be a subplot in my story that deals with that, with somebody choosing to go off the bridge. And then that led to an entire series of subplots, interconnected. The visitor, whether you're hiking or on one of the main trails, or whether you're on the river, you are descending gradually, actually, but very quickly, from that Mesozoic, from the Mesozoic rocks at Lee's Ferry into and through the Paleozoic rocks. And as you start out, the Kaibab is quickly at river level, but the river cuts down very quickly. And so you're going through all the rock layers that I showed you on that columnar section. The Kaibab limestone, which is here on the already, you're looking at Kaibab limestone, and that's the horizon up at the top. It's 270 million years old. And oddly enough, I worked with the Kaibab equivalent rocks when I was working up in northeastern Nevada before I left the US Geological Survey. So Frankie's action, most of it, all of the early action takes place in Marble Canyon. And the Phantom Ranch, where we have decided we're going to end the story, will take place in the inner gorge. The inner gorge cuts through those bottommost units, the Vishnu schist and Zoroaster granite. And I think in the book, I was trying to give you this sense of the immense time that is passing, and how there are huge breaks in that section of rock where we lose millions and millions of years of rock through erosion or non-deposition. Chasm, I would say, is my attempt at integrating the rocks and the river and the people into a story. Every novel needs to integrate subplots. I think if you take some of your classic stories, they have, and you go back and look at the number of subplots, they don't last through the entire book. They'll be resolved. Some are resolved early, some, enter the story late and then are resolved at the end. But, your Jane Eyre has 13 subplots or something like that. So a complex story will have a number of different subplots that have to be legitimate. They answer questions about the main plot, and they reveal backstory of the witnesses, or the characters, and the main character, the protagonist. The one thing I had to decide at the very beginning was, what was Frankie's, why was Frankie here? Frankie teaches in Tucson. What is she doing on a raft trip down in Colorado? And there has to be a legitimate reason, or you're not going to buy the story. And so Frankie gets a call. And she gets a call from Dora Simpson. And Dora is someone I introduce in the third book. And she was a favorite of my readers. And they said, please bring her back sometime. So I said, well, this is a good time. Dora is a graduate student now in geology in Texas. And she and her major professor were taking 7 students on this raft trip down the Colorado. Well, there's an accident and the major professor is injured. Dora calls Frankie and says, will you fill in? And you can bring, your Philo Dane, the person, Frankie's love interest. Well, then he has to go off to Washington. So the fill-in for Philo is Frankie's brother, Luke. That's the reason he's there. So Frankie is a late addition to this, but she is the professor that allows the trip to continue. We also had, we were all geologists, or most of us were, and we also had a geologist that was hired to lead our trip. And it's someone, Stan Booth, who had worked in the canyon. I think he'd been in the canyon more than 80 times, and he'd worked there all his life. He and his wife came along. And so he would lead the side trips. And as he's here in the middle of this picture, giving an explanation and talking about the rocks, talking about, in this case, it's the Coconino sandstone. And there are fossil reptile tracks that you can see, and I'll show you in the next slide. So I took this scene, or one of the other similar ones that we did on hikes with Stan, and I moved it to Nautoid Canyon and had Dora give a talk on that canyon, because that is what we did. And so I open the action of the novel with this happening. With Frankie, now, if you've got 2 rafts with 28 people plus 3 guides, you've got too many people for the readers. They can't handle that many characters, because you've also got villains. And so in this book, we have the 7 students. We have Frankie and Dora and Luke, Frankie's brother, and then we have the villains. There are a few other people named, but that keeps a handle on it and allows me to move players around without swamping the reader with too many names. The reptile tracks that we were looking at are on your right. Those are in the Coconino. And in all of my books, I think, as I've said, landscape is a character in the book. And so from that place, that if you look up, this is what we were looking at Jackass Creek, which is where we were. And that was only mile 8 down the canyon. And you'd already at water level, river level, gone from Kaibab all the way down to the Coconino at mile 8. So the river's cutting down pretty quickly. But you're looking at the section on top is the Kaibab on the left and the Coconino, and then down into what's called the Hermit Shale. The seeing reptile tracks in rocks can be mirrored by another element that needs to be brought in if I'm doing the landscape, and that is the ecology, the flora and the fauna of an area. So we, this was at a lunch spot, and he came to visit during mating season, apparently. So the footprints that you saw in the Coconino there are mirrored by this lovely lizard who came to join the party. Another element that can tie into an aspect of time, these were at, these are desert bighorn sheep. This was, I think, 18 miles down river. But if you look at petroglyphs by archaic Indians, or Anasazi is a more comfortable term for many, you're going to see this exact profile in those petroglyphs. These have been here for many thousands of years, and they have been a source of food. So it ties in with the prehistory of the area, just seeing these. When you're in the rafts, you can't really carry on conversations. And so for the characters to have conversations and exchange information, for things to happen that we as readers need from a story, that has to happen in the camps or, while during a lunch stop. So this was my first night stop. This is North Canyon. And I still wasn't sure that I was going to open the story at Nautoid Canyon, which is still downriver 13 miles. But this was our first campsite, and I needed to tell the reader what that meant, what it looked like, what did the tents look like, how were things set up, and you had everybody works together to empty the rafts, set up the cooking area, the guides cook. And this was, North Canyon was one of the two most beautiful campsites that we had. As you get into the inner gorge, the campsites get smaller and smaller and smaller, and until you're almost just on rock in these in the narrow inner gorge. But at this point, there are a few beautiful campsites where side canyons enter the main river. I've just figured out how to go backwards inadvertently. When you get into, this is called the Redwall Limestone, this unit that's down at river level here. And you can see that it forms natural caverns. This is a huge, at its lower center, that is a huge cavern. It is sand floored. They don't allow camping there. And it's so vast that even John Wesley Powell mentions it when he first came down the river. He did camp there. Notice how green the water is still. You will see later on that the water is no longer green. The water becomes turgid. It becomes brown or yellowish brown. After a storm, that is what happens when you, especially after the juncture with the Little Colorado River, which carries a ton of debris into the main river. I realized at this point when I got to the Redwall that I would need a cave to shelter Frankie. Because Frankie becomes separated from the rest of the group and ends up in the river. So I started looking at where that could happen. The Redwall Limestone is the most usable unit because it easily forms these caves and alcoves and caverns. And I knew that as I approached Nautoid Canyon this would be at river level. And we're going, so a map again, we're now in that topmost of the squares, which is enlarged at the top of the map. So we just passed Redwall Cavern, and the next stream on our left as we're going down, port, if you will, as we're going downstream is Nautoid Canyon. And why is that even important? Well, for a bunch of geologists and paleontologists, it's very important because it has this shelf at river level, which has the most exquisite nautiloid fossils. Nautiloids are, as I said, are the relatives of the chambered nautilus, except that they're, if you unrolled a chambered nautilus, they were elongated. They had a similar creature. It's a squid-like creature. And they, of course, have been extinct for many, many millions of years. This is the fossil Frankie's looking at when things happen and she becomes separated from her group. This is where the action of the story begins. You can see the internal semicircular ridges, and that's because a nautilus will build up a wall behind it as it grows. So it won't use what's behind it. It will keep growing and becoming larger. It needs to make its chamber larger. And so it just walls off the one behind it and continues to grow. So if Frankie's in the water, which is how she becomes separated from the group, she's got a problem because you have rapids. And as I said, people can be carried along the bottom people can drown easily. People can develop hypothermia in a very short time because the water is 47 degrees. And can you imagine what would happen if you were out of a raft going through this? I was in the first raft at this point, taking a picture of the second raft going through a rapids. So this is all within that first action sequence. How do you get out of a river when it's surrounded by sheer walls? I had to find a place that Frankie literally could get out and find a way to do it. Well, Tamarisk has invaded the Grand Canyon. They try to eradicate it, but it has invaded. And here again, you see the Redwall Limestone with caves. And this is at a place called the Bridge of Sighs. And if anybody knows their history, they know that the Bridge of Sighs, prisoners that passed over the Bridge of Sighs in Italy, they never came back. It led to the torture chambers and the dungeons. Well, this was some romantic named this the Bridge of Sighs. But not only do we have that, we also have caves that are large enough to hold a person, and we have vegetation which someone could grab hold of to get out of the water. So we only passed by here on my trip but I found it perfect for my uses. Eventually, obviously, Frankie has to rejoin her group. And there, further downriver, there are some scenes that take place at an absolutely amazing area called Nankaweep. And Nankaweep, we're approaching it here. So we're heading down the stream, and you can see that that you're not looking at rapids here, you're looking at quieter water. There's a lot of vegetation on either side here. And Nankowi Delta, which is, you know, under the cliffs in the sun, was used by the Anasazi. They planted crops there, they harvested their crops, they lived throughout the winter here, and they built granaries in the caves up in the Redwall Limestone. So the river has cut down below the Redwall here. It's the cliff forming unit, kind of halfway up this slide. Behind the river, if you hiked back up, there is a trail down Nankaweep. It's very, very rough. It's very long. It's very difficult, and it's not heavily used. But there is, behind the river cliffs, there is this interior parkland. We did not hike up to it at Nankaweep, but this is further down the river at Upper Deer Creek. And it's a similar parkland that the Anasazi also used. They were throughout this area. And it's stunningly beautiful. To me, it's one of the most beautiful places I've ever seen. They left the Anasazi left traces of themselves behind. And these were the most personal traces, as far as I was concerned. They left their handprints. So these are pictographs and not petroglyphs. They left pictographs along the rock walls by Deer Creek, but that is not the only place. They are throughout the canyon if you hike back in. Frankie, when we get to Nankaweep, we discover that Frankie and her brother were here when they were children, or there when they were children, because their father is an archaeologist. And he was excavating in this interior parkland. I'm calling it parkland. It's because it has trees and it has some streams flowing through it, and it's quite vegetated. So part of the backstory is Frankie with this brother Luke, and so it brings back memories, and you're learning more about Frankie and the summer that they spent there when she was quite young, when they were both quite young. This particular handprint, I had climbed up these cliffs. It was an awful trail to get up to Deer Creek, and the trail is so narrow you actually have to kind of half slide under these buttresses just to get back into that area I had showed you. Well, this was at nose level, and I did stop and take a picture of this pictograph. To me, these are personal. They communicate through time, and that's what I want the books to do, is kind of bring this communication through time from rocks, fossils, and previous cultures. So Nankowi Delta area, where the Anasazi planted crops and had granaries up in the cliffs, is one of the most visited spots in the Colorado area. And so I had to use it. Only one reason is because it is so vegetated. We spent the night there, and the and did the hike up to the Granaries. And you can see this is also one of the most photographed spots in the canyon. This was not my photograph, it was common use photograph. But you can see what the color of the water here after a storm. What they, with the Granaries, what they did was brick up with blocks these natural alcoves and use them for storing the maize, etc., that they had farmed down on the delta. So we are through the center part of the area. There are threatening things that happen at Nankaweep, and but the raft trip continues, and we're getting down into that big loop, Furnace Creek, and past the Little Colorado River Junction. This is Furnace Creek. Again, look at the color of the water. It is brown now, and after a storm. Furnace Creek is dotted with Anasazi settlements, I mean, evidence of past settlements and farming there. And it is a popular place for people today to camp. And there's a crucial scene from one of the subplots involving a villain that takes place here. And then what happens? You enter the gorge. You enter the heart, the crystalline heart of the Colorado River Gorge. And you're looking at these black rocks of the Vishnu schist and Zoroaster granite. And there aren't the trails in, but this is also where you have rapids that just throw you about, and sometimes you have to pull over, get out of your rafts and scout the rapids before you go through them. Partway through the gorge is where Bright Angel Creek joins the Colorado River, and the North Kaibab Trail comes down from the North Rim to join the Bright Angel Creek. At the river, the main river, you have Bright Angel Campground. This is Phantom Ranch, where there used to be orchards. And there are two bridges. There's a Kaibab Bridge and a second bridge that join the Bright Angel Bridge, that join the trails from the two rims. And the hikers come down, spend the night at Phantom Ranch. And all of the rafts that come down also stop here. They go in. This is the only place you could make a phone call or send a postcard. This is, if you watch the old Walt Disney mule ride down into the Grand Canyon, this is where the mules are stabled. And I can still see that. I was very young when I first saw it. So the small bridge here crosses Bright Angel Creek. And you're surrounded by the Vishnu schist and Zoroaster granite, not these layered rocks that you have seen before. At this point, we're looking back down Bright Angel Creek from that bridge towards one of the bridges that crosses the rivers. It's the Kaibab, North Kaibab Bridge. And as an homage to Edward Abbey, I don't know if you people have read Edward Abbey, but I started reading him 50 years ago. As an homage to him, there's a subplot which involves the bridge and involves the main villain of one of the main villains of the piece. So I wanted to make sure that I used that without giving anything more away. And turning around to look the other way, you're looking up north Kaibab towards Phantom Ranch buildings and Box Canyon, and the North Kaibab Trail, which cuts up through them to the North Rim. So you have, in this story, this is the access point from people on the North Rim to come down through Box Canyon. And there is a crucial scene. In fact, the climactic scene takes place in Box Canyon back there. And this is another view of that, a closer view of that bridge that's crossing the Colorado River. By the way, if those bridges were down, there would be no traffic between the North Rim and the South Rim, unless somebody brought in boats to ferry people over, hikers over. So I decided that my book ended there at Phantom Ranch with that climactic scene. But Frankie, I will tell you, continues, she continues and goes through the next 4 days of the journey, 4 or 5 days. And then how does she get out? Just in case you were wondering, how does she get out of that canyon? Because she doesn't take it all the way down to the Gulf. And the answer is you're helicoptered out from Whitmore Canyon, mile 282, and you land right here in the middle of this valley at a ranch where they built an airstrip. And then you get on a flight, a fixed wing plane, which takes you back to Cliff Dwellers Lodge, where you started up not far from Lee's Ferry. So this is, at this point, now that you can see where we are coming out and that, I did survive my journey, I will open it up to questions.
That was absolutely amazing. And your talk, your pictures that you were using are phenomenal.
Thank you.
Well, we have several questions here, and I'm not going to do this in order that they gave them. I really want to do it in just as it seems to me. But one of the questions is, do you use pictures of the geology in your books?
No, it would make them far too expensive, and they were expensive enough as it was. I have used geology pictures of mine on the covers of a number of the books. So you'll actually see my photographic work there.
Great. And then another question is, what size were those fossilized footprints?
Oh, yeah, I didn't, normally I will put scale on things, but there really wasn't time. They were quite small. So I would say they were about 1 inch to 1.5 inches long. And our Canadian friend can translate that into centimeters.
Okay, that's great.
I can try.
No, I won't make you. I won't make you, Therese.
Another question is, in real life, do geologists work as detectives, perhaps in forensics?
Yes. As a matter of fact, I had a dear friend who died sometime in the last year and a half, who wrote the manual on forensic geology. And you can find a number of stories. If you look up forensic geology texts, you will find a number of them published. There are forensic geology societies. There is forensic geologists have been hired by certain counties, cities, counties, states. The San Bernardino County in California had one, a woman, as it turns out. And forensic geology is as old as Sherlock Holmes. There's actually, he discusses using clays and soils and to solve a case. And in fact, he does it more than once. But I think when Coors was kidnapped, they used forensic geology to solve that case. So it is used.
That is so interesting. Another person here wants to know, is it best to read your books in sequence?
Yes. I read books in sequence because I like to see the development of the character, and I write my books that way. So I would recommend you do that. Now, people have come back to me and they've read Quarry first, and then they go back and they start over, and Quarry is the third book. They go back, they start over at the beginning, and then they reread Quarry when they get there. So, and then move on. So I would say yes, just because the person asked that question, it means they read books the same way I do, or series.
Okay, Susan, this has been phenomenal. We are so grateful for you to join us here and talk about your books and the geology. It's just great. And I want to tell everyone that the library has ordered 8 copies of each book of Susan's, each title, and it's supposed to be in the library. With all of this pandemic hoorah, not sure if they've actually arrived in the library, but we absolutely want you all to borrow her books from the library and buy Susan's books online. So we really encourage you to do that. And then I'm going to take this opportunity to mention our next speaker is going to be Mike Hayes, and he is going to be speaking on March 20th. That's a Saturday at 2 p.m. And if you received a Zoom invitation for this talk, you will receive a Zoom invitation for Mike Hayes' talk on March 20th at 2 p.m. And then our final talk in the series is going to be Kathy McIntosh, and she is speaking April 20th, which is a Tuesday evening at 7 p.m. And again, you'll receive that invitation as well. I just want to thank you again, Susan Cummins Miller, for that phenomenal talk and for sharing all your wonderful knowledge with us. We're so excited to read your books, and looking forward to seeing all of you again at our next author talk. Thank you so much for joining us, and tell all your friends about this and have them join Friends of the Library of Kirk-Bear Canyon, which is supporting these talks.
Thank you, Elise. Thank you, Jody. And I saw Kathy McIntosh among the group too. So she and Mike were both here today. So I look forward to your talks.
All right. Well, thanks so much. And I'm wishing everybody a happy day.
Ditto.